Hello, YouTubers. This is another session where we continue our discussions, design, and standardization discussions about this new initiative that I started with the identity team at Microsoft called OData Neo. OData Neo is our attempt to kind of pick up a technology like OData and make it more modular, make it, have transcendence, easy to mold and configure and plug into different protocols and different systems so it can be useful for as many use cases out there as possible. And this morning, I had such a great surprise. I had Carol from the OASIS, organization reaching out to me and saying, hey, we heard about this OData Neo initiative that you're working on. We are the standardization, team. We basically work together. We've been working on the OData, since the beginning, and we want to make sure that if anybody wants to adapt the technology, that there are constraints and standardization in place to make sure that the technology is implemented the same as a protocol across all technologies, across all organizations. So without any further ado, Chet and Carol from OASIS, you guys already met Mike. Mike is very popular. You already talked about Mike a little bit. Carol, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and maybe Chet as well after that?
Sure, sure. It's my pleasure. It's exciting to talk to you today, Hassan.
Thank you.
Yeah, OASIS has been involved in OData since the beginning. OASIS itself has been around since 1993, actually, and I have been with OASIS since then. Um,
Nice,
but,
nice,
but we started as HTML Open. We've evolved to where we are now, but we've always been about open standards. And
nice.
we kind of we are like a federation of different projects, and each project has its own chairs. They set their own dialogue, they set their own work schedule. But we're not maybe as widely known as some of our children are, like OData, but we're the home of a lot of different kinds of standards that affect people's lives every day. So like
Awesome.
Oasis is the home of SAML, the security assertion markup language. So whenever you're logging into a website with single sign-on, you're using an OASIS standard. Open document
Nice.
format. When you open up a document, you're using OASIS standard. If you're in the US, you get an alert about a missing child on your phone. That's the Common Alerting Protocol,
The Amber
OASIS.
Alert. Yeah, Amber Alert. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
If you use
Awesome.
your phone to open your car, that's MQTT, OASIS. So we do a lot in a lot of different areas. But Microsoft is one of our biggest supporters. But we have members from around the globe. And yeah,
Awesome.
but OData is really, really one of the jewels in the crown of OASIS, we like to think.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'll get back to you on that standardization part because that's what I want our audience to know what it is and understand really why is it important? Can I just, just to clone a repository and run the code? What is the standardization thing, right? But let's just go real quick to Chet. Chet, do you want to tell people who you are and what you do with the
Sure.
Oasis?
Chet Ensign, I was actually also part of the start of STML Open in 1993. I worked for a company that was one of the founders. I've been with OASIS now since 2011, and I work as our technology community steward, which means that my job is to basically help all of these groups successfully work within the overall OASIS framework to produce the work products and the standards that they want to get out the door. Um, you talk about um, the groups coming together and trying to figure out how do we get this done, or what's the right step? How do we move this forward? I think part of the appeal of OASIS is that we've got a streamlined framework, rules framework that doesn't necessarily um, bog groups down with a lot of tedious, detail things they have to attend to, but gives an overall framework and assurance when those steps are followed that the rest of the world will then say, oh, okay, we know what it means to be an OASIS standard. And my job is to help synthesize all of our experience over the years with all of these different groups,
Uh-huh.
and then use that knowledge to help groups succeed. And so as I've said to some people, as the person whose job is to make sure that the rules are followed, sometimes I have to say no. The
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
difference here is we don't say no and walk away and you're like, well, now what? We
Uh-huh.
say no, but what are you trying to accomplish? we'll find a way to get it done. And that's a big part of my job, is helping the groups work those, work those, those steps so that they can succeed and get through the project. And also to do a lot of hand holding, arm around the
Gotcha.
shoulder,
Just
it's
make sure
okay.
that
People have
people.
been here before,
Yeah, we
Gotcha.
say that Chet is like a marriage counselor. He's like a den mother. He's like a Sherpa showing the way, helping carry the load.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And of course, I'm also joined today by Mike. You guys have seen Mike before. He's the lead architect, API architect on the OData identity team. His insights has been there since the beginning. He saw OData even before it was called OData morph into what it is today, and he's fully supportive for the effort into turning it into something even more useful and more exciting to live for years and years to come. Hi, Mike. Nice to meet you again.
Hey, Hassan, good to see you again.
See you. So we're joined by the OASIS. You were talking about these folks yesterday, or
Right.
the other day on Friday, and now they're here, and I'm really excited to have everybody here. So okay, so here's the question, Chet and Carol, what is what is OASIS? What does it stand for? Like I just saw this. Why do I need it? Can I just write some code and get it running? Why do I need standardization? What is OASIS for? Go ahead. Mhm.
Well,
OASIS, it started as an acronym, Organization for the Advancement of Structured Information Standards.
Okay.
Because we came from HTML and then there was HTML, XML, and we wanted to sort of get a pretty wide umbrella. But right
Mhm.
now we do a lot of in open source as well as standards, where we take open source projects and they can standardize some parts of what they're doing that they want to standardize. And so we just sort of go by OASIS. Our full name really is OASIS Open,
Okay.
because everything we are about is making sure that everything is done openly, fairly, democratically, that it's done in a way that can be recognized by de jure bodies like ISO or IEC or ITU. So you can get that stamp of approval, which is very important for companies and especially for governments, when governments are looking at, was this developed correctly? Or is it safe to
Mm,
implement? Is it safe to recommend? They look and make sure that it was done at a place like OASIS, because we can
okay.
make sure that the IP and everything that was handled safely and done right.
Gotcha. So my understanding is technology now is in every aspect of our lives. Sometimes technology gets into things that can be life-threatening, right? Like all the technologies that we use today to help us with our medical, field, technology into aerospace and all that. And if there is no standardization, there is no guarantee whatsoever that the technology that is being implemented follows certain strict rules and constraints to make sure that it doesn't harm anybody, or to get the maximum benefit out of it. Is that what you're trying to say? This is like it's like a contract. You're basically creating a contract between all the different technology providers out there, so they can agree on that contract, so when they're building technologies that will eventually talk to each other or talk to other integrated systems, they don't break any rules. Did I get that right? I don't know. I'm just
yeah.
trying here. What do you think? Go
Well,
ahead,
yeah,
Chit.
it's a really good point, Hassan. Part of the reason organizations like OASIS exist is that we serve as a safe harbor where competitors can come and work together. Microsoft and Oracle and IBM and SAP and companies that would be seen as competitors in in most financial or transactions can come together to work on a common set of problems.
Okay.
And so what you're trying to do is one of the things that we've been saying is it's where open source comes to interoperate. To me, that's a key benefit that the standards part brings. What's the benefit of something like OData?
Mhm.
Well, it's that I can program my piece, you can program your piece, you can program your piece, and it won't perfectly mesh, of course, because these are
Mhm.
complex things, but it's a heck of a lot faster trip to say, oh, we got this one thing that we have defined differently. Let's figure out what we're going to do. But
I
that's the
love it.
benefit of the standardization, is that it allows competitive companies to identify a common problem that they all serve, that they
Mhm.
all have,
Yeah.
and then come together without fear of anybody coming in and accusing of anti-competitive behavior.
Ah,
One of the first standards that I worked on after coming here was AMQP, the Advanced Message Queuing
oh,
Protocol.
the IBM MQ. Oh no, that's one of their implementations. Yeah, yeah, I gotcha.
MQTT is
Mm.
is one you're thinking of. No,
Yep, yep.
this was a comparable messaging standard, AMQP.
Uh-huh.
It came out of one of the banks because the IT director there was sitting with his staff saying, "So I'm looking at the budget here, and it looks like we have to rewrite a message queuing protocol every time we start a new project with a new bank or a new customer." And his developers were like, "Well, yeah, because there's no standard for that, and they've got it this way, they've got it this way." And so he said, "So we decided we needed a standard because we were wasting a ton of money writing custom interfaces over and over again where we could have done it with one thing." And a whole bunch of companies were able to come together and do it. So I think that that's a key thing, is that we provide that safe harbor where you're still going to compete, but
Uh-huh.
you're going to compete on the stuff that it makes sense to compete on because you've got a benefit in this area or you've got a benefit in this area. But this generic requirement that you all need, get together and do it.
Oh my God, this is even bigger than I thought. Like you're trying to make sure that, the competitiveness in the business realm doesn't leak into the advancement of technology and our ability to oh my God, this
Exactly.
is
Yeah.
amazing. This is evolution. This is human evolution. You guys are basically the gatekeepers or the safeguards against, corporates, trying to hide away technologies and, do things differently that may eventually lead to a disaster. You're making sure, nope, you have to agree on a contract and you have to comply by this contract at least 90%, 99%, so we make sure that systems can still work with each other without letting, the competitiveness of the market influence, the decision into building technologies. I love that. This is
Right. Well,
wow.
I think that it shows the changing mindset in the development community and in the commercial community, that in part has been driven by open source.
Mhm.
Companies have started to realize that your proprietary advantage does not lie in owning the entire pipeline, from from the back end databases all the way up to the screen. How
Mhm.
crazy would it be if every single one of us had to buy a Microsoft monitor, because the
Mhm.
only way we could run Microsoft products were on Microsoft monitors.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
um, yeah. Well, I know but it was what everybody believed for so long, was we want
That's
to
right.
control.
That was the case. It still is the case with Apple products. Like today, if the product that Apple, that if you're buying an accessory, even with the Wi-Fi, or Bluetooth, you couldn't connect an Android phone
Yeah,
to an
yeah,
Apple phone because they have a completely their own different thing in terms of standardization, right? Which is this mindset is of the past. Doesn't belong today. I see Logitech today building systems for
yeah.
Apple and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so so
This
so
makes me want to shoot Apple, right? This makes me want to go just and I love their products. I use
Yep,
Apple, but every time they come out with the next generation of their device, it's got a different plug. It's got a
yep,
different connection. And these, it's now just the two here,
yep,
right?
yep.
And all of the stuff that I have that has been working with my Apple products for so long is now going to be defunct because it's a different plug and there's
Yep.
only two of them. And I mean, you've got a really good point. When you think about what made the success of the Windows um, uh,
As an
operating system,
operating
the Windows
system. Yeah,
systems,
yeah.
it's that initially IBM said, "Go make us something cheap and easy to manufacture that'll get our customers off our backs about these damn personal computers." And so the engineers went and did a great job using off-the-shelf components, which meant that all of these other companies, like I forget who the first ones were, but it was like within a year, all of these companies were cranking these things out and competing on price and features because the system wasn't locked down.
I
Um,
love that. I love that. So here's the thing. Mike and I were talking about, this initiative
right.
called OData Neo, right? And this initiative is an initiative to allow, OData as a protocol to evolve, to allow people, to use the framework to build their own modules, to be able to support different protocols, to be able to, do whatever they want with it, as a technology, and allow it to evolve and live further into the future. You know, what do we need in terms of standardization? Because if we're building a standard, right? If we're building a technology, we want to standardize that technology. So if someone wants to go build it in Java or C++ or whatever technology they want to build it with, they're still at the end of the day gonna need to integrate with another system that complies by the same contract. And the tech industry have been playing by that rule. We use what we call Swagger documents. So someone goes in there and says, I'm going to expose an API endpoint, and here's my Swagger document. If you
Right.
comply by this contract, I feel like what you guys are doing here, it's the same thing, but it's on a global level, like, much higher level than my pay grade, to be honest with you. It's just you're all the way up there, and you're saying if you're going to invent a technology or evolve a technology, you're going to need to follow particular standards, to make sure that you're not breaking anyone else's system. So OData Neo, we're taking it to the next level.
Hmm.
It's not a replacement of the existing OData. This is an evolution of the technology itself to make it more usable and more consumable. And I'll let Mike talk a little bit about that part, when it comes to, how we're taking this to the next level. But how does OASIS come into play here? How can you guys help us make sure that this is a safe technology, that if we decide to deploy OData on Mars, it doesn't kind of let people strangled in there waving while the ship is just leaving them and going back to Earth? What do you think about that? Go ahead. Either one of you, Carol or Chet. Go ahead.
Chet, you want to?
Yeah, I think one of the keys of the Oasis is that we don't try to impose our assumptions or our expectations, on the development community. You guys know what you're trying to accomplish. You all know what your what your goals are, and you know what pieces, or you can figure out what pieces you want to be able to continue to agilely churn on and
Mhm.
work them out. Whereas you know which pieces you want to keep stable. I mean, in a way, that's what we're looking at in this new world. Part of the beauty of open source is you can just keep cranking out code and cranking out code and rebuilding and rebuilding and making advances really, really fast. But part of the benefit of standardizing portions of it is that when people then start building on top of that, you know
Mm.
they can work safely with the notion that, hey, this thing is not going to change on me overnight. uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if it changes in ways that are going to affect me, it's going to be done in a forum that we're all going to be able to watch and manage and have some input on, and we'll know it's coming. As you were saying, Mike, about the difference between the first releases of OData and the current version, you know, making back make putting something into place that's backwards incompatible is not a step you take lightly.
Yeah.
um, and so that's the confidence that it gives to people. So I think it's like striking that balance, and it's really you guys, the development team, who go, we want to run with this part, but this part is stabilizing. We see what it is, and we see an advantage to standardizing this piece so that this now gets into a version track over time where
Mm-hmm.
people can rely on using it. So we'll take that part and we'll put that over here, and we'll take that way.
Gotcha.
Right.
Mike, how do we as engineering team, make sure that we still confirm, to a standard of any type? Like OASIS, we sat down, we had the committee, we had the talk, we draw the line. Usually the constraints come before the technology itself, but it could work vice versa. Like you could come up with an approach and you say, here's my architecture, here's how I'm going to have my engineers develop it. Let's talk about the constraints from a standardization standpoint. How have we been keeping up, with with OASIS as a standard and making sure that we don't diverge from that path? Because I know today there's slight differences between OData that you may consume from an Oracle database versus an SAP system versus an ASP.NET system versus a Java-based system. How do we stay up with that from a
So,
development standpoint? Go ahead.
as I was mentioning the other day, OData is still a very active standard. So by no means have we just said, oh, okay, we've completed OData, we've published it, now everybody implement it and we can close the technical committee. So
Right.
we have weekly meetings in the technical committee. And as Chet well knows, we're very active in pushing out new public releases of stuff and public previews and new versions of stuff. So one of the great challenges that we have is making sure that in all the new work that we do, we remain compatible. And we make sure that, even our latest version of OData was OData 401.
Yep.
And it added some significant new functionality, but it did it all in a backwards compatible way.
Nice.
And the other facility we have within OData is an introspection mechanism where you can ask a service, what do you support? Do you support this feature? Do you support that feature? Not even just at a service level, but even for this individual entity set or for this individual property, can I update this property? Can I do certain queries against this collection? And we've designed that to be very generic because even from the very first versions of OData, it was never expected that a single implementation implement the entire OData specification. We wanted to make sure that, so really the genesis of OData was taking a look across a number of different REST API patterns that were adopted in the industry and saying, how can we basically define the set of reusable patterns across all of these that provide for interoperability, and as well as best practices. And so we started defining common patterns for doing things like querying the REST endpoint that you were communicating with, for representing the payloads, for describing the services and so forth. And all of these became what is OData. And over time, people have come and said, geez, I really like OData. I like the simplicity. I love that it's standard, but I need to do this. I need to represent temporal data, or I need to be able to do more complex aggregations, or I need this modeling concept or that. And so we've been able to build on top of the core OData specification these new features and functionalities. So in fact, we have a temporal extension that is undergoing a great deal of activity right now in the TC. At the same time, we've been building off these other. Chet mentioned his role in kind of seeing through and finding what we need, what OASIS needs to do in order to help the TCs, and that's really been tremendous to see over the years that I've been involved with OASIS, the evolution of OASIS, and into some of the things that we've been exploring the OData Technical Committee in terms of the open repos and the GitHub repos, and being able to start doing some open source projects through OASIS, where we're starting to work not just on the protocol, but also on implementations and libraries and new experiences built around OData. And OASIS has provided us the open playground for doing that, which has been really fantastic. So,
open playground, I like that.
Yeah.
I see in many ways OASIS serving a similar role here in trying to kind of help provide some of the playground for us to experiment and evolve and
play nice,
build stuff.
Yeah, play nice. So
yes, we've got the playground monitors to make sure that we all
we're all compatible. So Carol, here's a question for you. Let's say I'm about to sign this 1-year contract with company X, who claims to be compliant with OASIS, right, standard. how do I know that they are actually compliant? Does a committee from OASIS goes and validates their API endpoints, assuming that they're proprietary and they're exposing a protocol that claims to be compliant? How do we know they're actually compliant? Like, what are there automated tools in place? Do you assign a committee to go and test the entire platform? How do you guys
That's
know people are actually following? Go ahead.
That's a
Go ahead.
good question, and some, and it depends on OASIS. OData is special. I mean, but each of our projects are special. Some of them are working on self certifications, test suites, or ways. In some cases, there's third parties that do certification.
Mm.
With OData and most of our standards, the best way is, I'm going to say, is to be working with a company that's involved in the standards. So our rosters, OASIS members, OData members are listed, publicly available, and the best way is to work with one of them, because you know that
Oh.
they're involved and they deeply are involved in not only what the standard is now, but what it's going to be.
So
Um,
members of the committee that actually, plays a role into forming the standard are more likely to be people that will follow that standard. And, working with them, we will be able to have a higher chance of following that particular OASIS standard. I see.
I think
I
so,
see.
absolutely.
So with OData Neo, just like I was talking to Mike and Sam Shu from the other session, the usually there is an idea that happens, and then standardization happens around it to protect it, and then there's a technology and materialization, like Mike was just saying. We create actual libraries and actually materialize that work. Is it ever, are you guys like, is the OASIS standard in any way, shape, or form impacted by the community, like based on the market and how things are going? How does the idea propagate all the way up to become another clause or another rule or another standard, in the OASIS? Like, let's say, for instance, we created a technology, we thought it's going to work, and then it had a very negative feedback in terms of implementation, right? Sometimes we implement a technology, Mike, you probably seen this more than anybody else. We create something, we put it out there, and then it doesn't work quite the way we want. Does this feedback, how what's the turnaround time? How fast it is to pick up a feedback and propagate that all the way up and actually change the standard according to the community feedback? Is this something that takes months, years? What's the measure there? You guys know what I mean? So how does the community impacts the
So there's a
standard?
lot of there's several questions
Uh-huh.
or several
There.
comments or several observations that are wrapped up in your question here. Let me take the first one. How does the community feedback to the committee, to the technical committee?
Yep.
So part of the formal OASIS process is public reviews and feedback cycles, followed by formal approvals by the technical committee. So before updates to so typically when the community is working on on a new release, they've got a bunch of issues that they're taking on, trying to address, and they will draft committee spec drafts
Mm.
to put that capture it in words, basically, words and code, and put that forward. At some point, that has to go out for a public review and get circulated so that other people outside of OASIS can look at it. So that
Mhm.
people are like, no, you've got this synchronization thing all wrong here. They can send those comments back in,
Mhm.
with a known channel for communicating, and knowing that at the very least the community is going to have to look at what they said and discuss it, and put some kind of a resolution on the record. And this has been opened up to some degree by the open repos, and the TC GitHubs, because it's a place where people can come in and actually open issues.
Nice. Nice.
So there are channels for that feedback. Then how does it end up in captured into standardization document? Well, I can tell you that a big part of what I I skim through every morning as I'm catching up on my email is the OData issues updates. Which come in, in groups of 6 or
Right.
more, right?
Yep. Yep.
I think OData in particular is managing that part of the process very, very well. I've several times when people said, "How should we do this?" I've said, "Go look at the way OData is doing it."
Nice.
The
Nice.
open issues in their issue management system, they track what they're doing there. They use those issues to keep track of those things all the way through to the text. So you start with issues, you get issues into text, you get text into drafts, you get the drafts out for public review. In terms of the turnaround, in general, this is a 1-year process probably. I mean, I'm trying to remember. Mike, 4.01 was approved.
This one took a while. Yeah.
Well, it did take a while.
Rightfully so. I mean, you're changing things across the entire,
Right.
like SAP systems, for instance, there are literally millions and millions of records for companies around the world, and they're using OData heavily. So a change like this is not to be taken lightly,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
It's not like changing a shirt or anything. It's okay, more like something more serious and more important than that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Sorry,
So
Chet. Go ahead.
it is probably anywhere from 12 to 18 months
Mhm.
to go through that. Now, can it be done faster? Yes, it can be done faster. There's, there are ways to approach it. For example, if you wanted to get something, and a couple of TCs have done this in the past, where we need to get something documented and out, but we don't want to make it part of the overall standard yet because we don't want to put out a release of the overall standard. They put that out as its own separate, committee spec draft to committee specification, so that it can get into a formalized shape where people can start to use it. But at the same time, you have not like taken on the process of moving the entire specification through the process, and then you can merge that in later. So that's one way of doing it. So there are agile ways to approach it and do it somewhat faster. But part of the benefit is making sure that, as you say, SAP can be pretty sure that they're not suddenly going to get an email in their inbox.
Yep.
Oh, by the way, this is going live tomorrow, and no warning to you, but hope this doesn't
Deal
go
with it. This is
out.
it.
or worse, and this is no longer valid.
Oh yeah, that too.
Here's one last question. I know we're almost on time. I just want to be respectful of all your times, but the last thing here, when do we allow for a beta release of certain things in standardization? Like you go and say, hey,
Yeah.
we're thinking about releasing this new change. Go ahead and try it. It's not official yet, but it's almost done. Like in software, we go from alpha, beta, and then maybe beta 2 and 3 and 4 before we actually go into general availability. Does this happen as well in terms of standardization?
I'd say that's what a committee specification draft essentially works as, is that beta release. OASIS makes all of its content available for free.
It's all public.
All public,
Nice.
all out there where anyone who's interested can find it. With well-established IPR regimens that cover you, so that you can work confident that nobody's suddenly going to come like leaping out of the trees onto you going, now I want my royalties. So that stuff gives people the confidence that you can take that committee spec draft and you can start playing around with it, and you can start seeing how it works, and you can start providing feedback.
I love it. I love it. Go ahead,
As
Mike.
Chet says, part of the process that OASIS brings to the table is this process of public review, of public input, of tracking all of that input. So again, the life cycle of a standard, long before it becomes a standard, even in the first place, you have to create these public previews and these committee specifications. The committee specification is reviewed publicly. There's a 30-day or 60-day, depending on this portion of it, where you are in the life cycle of spec evolution, where you are soliciting public feedback. And before you can move to the next stage, you have to address all of that feedback by OASIS processes. And it doesn't mean you have to accept everything, but you have to respond to it. And then, that the committee spec is really acknowledged as Chet says, I think the equivalent of a beta. This is something fairly stable that a lot of thought has gone into. It may still change, but it is something that you can start implementing too. And the processes work really, really well. That process for the public input and the different phases of the specifications and so forth really seems to do a good job of providing the input we need, such that when we do release that standard, we know that it has a lot of oversight, it has a lot of input, people are actually adopting it, people are using it, and it's working. Does OASIS still have the 3 statements of implementation?
Yep. You've got to have a minimum of 3 statements of use, which are assertions that a company has implemented the committee specification.
From different companies using different stacks I mean, there really is, it's not something that you can just rubber stamp. It really is something that there's a process in place, and there's a good reason for that. And it's addressing all the concerns that you mentioned. We want to make sure that by the time it reaches an OASIS standard, that it's really something that's going to be valuable to the community.
Bulletproof.
That's awesome. You guys are, got me thinking. Like, I've been trying to build an engineering standard. That's why you saw in the link that you clicked something to kind of bring the engineers together around, how to implement software. Because today it's wild, wild west. People add in business logic in the API controller implementation, and they go and take in, back-end code and put it into the front-end code. It's a wild, wild west out there. That'll be a discussion for another day. That's like, I just published this book, called The Standard for building end-to-end, software end-to-end, because I saw how chaotic our industry is. But that's a discussion for another day. I want to thank you all for, just coming in on such a short notice. Literally this morning, I just put in the calendar invite, and, I can tell how excited people are around this initiative. Mike, thank you so much for jumping in. I know you're super busy. Sim, Carol, and Chet, you guys, just the proactiveness, it just makes my heart happy. I really have to say that. Just the ability of people reaching out and saying, I want to do this. I want to help you. I'm here for you. Go ahead, Chet. Do you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say I was only kidding about Apple. I love Apple.
Too late. OASIS.
Too late.
One thing is very frustrating, but
no worries. It's a great example.
I don't wish them ill. I'm very happy with it.
I'll tell you this, it's a great example. Like, by the way, just to let you know, like, there's a lot of companies out there that have gone through the exact same mistake. I was just talking to Mike about this the other day. I was saying one of the biggest mistakes that we make in software is that we built it in a way that is not rewritable. I am doing something different here with OData Neo. I'm building it with the intent that it's so easy to understand that someone would come in and say, I can make this better. I can make this faster. It's built with the intent to be rewritable. And in order for it to be rewritable, it has to be readable. The code has to be something that a grandma in Nebraska could just look at it and understand what it's doing. I always tell people, make it simple, keep it simple, so we can evolve. Technology is really important today. We wake up in the morning, some people, the first thing they do before they even wash their faces, they look at their notifications, and before they go to bed at night, the last thing they look at is their phone. So it's super involved, and we're trying to make sure that it's safe, and that's really, really important. Thank you all for joining us today. I have a gut feeling that we're gonna meet again, because there's a lot of questions that I have for you in terms of OData Neo standardization. But I appreciate your time today. Thank you so very much, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan.
Thanks very much,
guys.
Good evening.
Mike, good to meet you.